longer trying to overwhelm Russian defenses with armored formations. All the planning and theory about combined arms operations to try to break through defenses, all that seems to have been cast aside, and now we're back to the old practice of sending large numbers of infantry to try to storm positions. And perhaps, if one believes some Russian reports, we've had the closest approximation up to this point to what have been called human wave tactics, though on the part of Ukraine, and I remain skeptical that things are quite this bad. Anyway, the net effect of all of this is that after, well, more than 24 hours of extremely intense fighting, the Ukrainians appear to have captured a settlement called Piatikhatki, and that appears to be the sum total of what they've achieved. It seems that Ukrainian losses have been absolutely horrendous, that they have lost large numbers of men, and over the course of the last 24 hours, I've been getting seeing reports flooding in, that at Piatikhatki, this settlement that the Ukrainians did capture, Ukrainian casualties were simply horrendous, with talk that the equivalent of an entire battalion of the Ukrainian army has been destroyed, along with its equipment, and that the settlement itself has been almost completely destroyed as a result of relentless Russian artillery fire and attacks by Russian multiple rocket launch systems of the TOS-1 type, which fire these terrifying thermobaric shells. They're kind of flamethrower machines. And it seems, as I said, that the Ukrainians have suffered huge losses in this area. Indeed, there's even some claims that Russian officers and Russian soldiers have themselves been shocked by the sight of the numbers of dead and wounded soldiers, Ukrainian soldiers, littering the battlefields, and that in fact it has been all but impossible for the Ukrainians to evacuate their wounded. Now, I want to stress these are all Russian reports. I don't know what the truth is. The Ukrainians have said extremely little about all of this, but it does seem as if Piatikhatki is the only place that they were able to capture in this attack. And as I said, its value to them is, well, doubtful. It is still in what was the grey zone up till a few months ago, when the Russians advanced into this area in January and basically prepared their forward positions ahead of their main fortified lines. The main Russian fortified lines continue to be well to the south, and if the Ukrainians are trying to break through to those fortified lines, they are making very slow progress in doing so. And all the reports, all the evidence, despite the accumulation of evidence of intense fighting going on along the contact line, Ukraine still has not confirmed that its southern offensive is underway. So that gives us a sense of how bleak things are, perhaps, because I can't help but think that if the offensive was making progress, the Ukrainians would be telling us something about it. And of course, it's not just in this area, the Zaporozhye, South Donbass area, where Ukraine has been trying to push forward. It's been trying to push forward in other places. There's been, again, suggestions that Ukraine has tried to establish some positions on some of the islands in the Dnieper River. These had to be abandoned when the waters flooded the islands after the Novaya Kakhovka dam collapsed. And there's even been rumours of cross-border raids across the Dnieper, but doesn't seem as if much of that has really happened, and I understand anyway that the Russians have returned to their original lines in the along the east bank of the Dnieper, and in fact nothing very much seems to be going on there. And there are Ukrainian attacks in other places. There's been more attempts by the Ukrainians to make some advances, apparently in the Avdiivka area. Radovka claims that they did make some advances, but not apparently of any major significance. They've also apparently now been pushed back in the Bakhmut area. The Russians have apparently now launched counterattacks against the Ukrainian troops in the Bakhmut area, and they seem to be pushing the Ukrainians back. And there's reports again from Radovka that the Russians are making attacks now on the village of Orekhovo-Vasilyevka, which is again somewhere to the north of, well, the former Bakhmut, Artyomovsk, as it now is. But anyway, that the Russians are actually pushing further in that direction. They never captured this village. I don't think that this was ever planned by the Russians, by the way, to capture Orekhovo-Vasilyevka at the time of the fighting in Bakhmut itself, but they are on its outskirts and they've been pushing back in this area. And interestingly, the Institute for the Study of War in Washington has also now acknowledged that the Russians are continuing to make more advances in the Kupiansk area. This is in the north, and of course it could be eventually that the Russians plan to try to recapture Kupiansk, but at the moment there's been no, there isn't actually very much information coming from there about what's actually going on, and the major focus is on the fighting in the south. And elsewhere, if you're talking about the south, it seems that, again, there were lots of Ukrainian attacks on the Vremevsky ledge. But once again, no real progress by the Ukrainians there. And lastly, I should say, when summarizing what's going on the battlefronts, that there's reports that